My name is Claudia Riegel. I'm the director of the City of New Orleans Mosquito and Termite Control Board, and I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me to talk about mosquito control today. So at the City of New Orleans, we do the mosquito abatement, rodent abatement, as well as termite control and pest control throughout Orleans Parish, which is New Orleans. So I'm focusing a lot about mosquitoes and integrated mosquito management, and that really is going to be the focus of today's talk. So just as a reminder here, water is essential for the mosquito life cycle. So the pupae, the larvae, the eggs, those are all reliant on water. Those adults are going to hatch, fly around, and again, those females are going to lay eggs just above the water line or sometimes even the water, depending on the mosquito species. So mosquito larvae feed on bacteria and other organisms, from in that water, sometimes even organic decaying material. So the eggs, when you're doing an inspection, right, you're going to be looking for those eggs. They're tiny often, but in some cases, they're actually rafts. So we're able to look at the rafts floating on the water. But take a quick look here and actually my cursor does work. So you can see here just this black line around this dish. Those are actually mosquito eggs. So they look like little specks of dirt. You can see a close-up as well. And these are the mosquito rafts that I was talking about that are very unique to Culex. When it comes to larvae, again, the eggs are going to hatch, the larvae are going to be in the water, they're wiggling around, and they're going to go through different stages called instars, typically 5 to 14 days. Again, it depends very much on temperature and even species, and the size of it will matter as well. Some can develop in very small amounts of water. So as you're doing your inspections of your properties, of your clients, very important to turn over any kind of water that you may have. Pupae would be the next stage. They're non-feeding. Again, 1 to 4 days, depends on temperature, species, that kind of stuff. They are pretty mobile. They will move around. Their shape is a little bit different. And from there, those adults are going to hatch. So the males and the females look very different. The males have that very feathery antennae, and the females do not. So, but it's only the females, right, that bite to take that blood meal so that they can produce those eggs. So very important, reproductive here and sort of feeding behavior. We already talked that a little bit, but the female mosquitoes feed on both animals and humans. But again, that's going to depend on species. There are some mosquitoes that feed on lizards or amphibians only. So very, very specific to those species. They're attracted by body odor, carbon dioxide from us breathing. So everyone's a little bit different, right? And sort of their attractiveness to mosquitoes. Those females need to have that blood meal in order to have that protein to produce the eggs. Females typically mate once and they store the sperm for life. And they typically will produce 4 to 5 batches of eggs in a lifetime. And as I mentioned, there's about 3,500 species of mosquitoes worldwide. But most of them are out in the environment doing their own thing. They're not necessarily biting humans. It's not their first choice. But of course, there's a few that are very important for disease, and that's going to be in the genera Aedes, Culex, and Anopheles. In the US, about 176 species, right? In Louisiana alone is about 80. We know now that actually there's a little bit more than 28 species here in Orleans Parish. In New Orleans, we've been looking. And so, but just a handful of those are causing us problems, that are medically important, and even in the veterinary world as well. When you're working with mosquitoes, it's important to know that we classify them by their breeding habitats. So here's a great example of floodwater mosquitoes. We also have that marsh, right? So it could be saltwater marsh or freshwater. You also have permanent water. And really, I think if you're servicing people's properties and have clients, the main type of container, or at least breeding habitat you're going to have, are those containers. And it's those containers that we really want to focus on when you're servicing those properties. And so let's talk a little bit about floodwater mosquitoes, because everything that I'm doing and talking about here today really is sort of in the context of control and management, right? So you might have a particular account that you just are scratching your head to find out where are these mosquitoes coming from, right? And so you may have to look around the area to see if there's any areas, marshy areas, or areas where some of these particular mosquitoes and floodwater, inland floodwater mosquitoes would be an issue. So a couple of genera here, Aedes culex, those are really the ones that we see often. They bite humans a lot, and actually livestock and pets as well. We typically get more calls about our floodwater mosquitoes than we do with some of our container mosquitoes, because some are big and their bite actually hurts. You can feel it. These are just a couple of examples, Aedes vexans and Serapha howardii. It's a pretty large mosquito actually, but Aedes vexans is very common in our parks, for example, where there's little depressions in the landscape. So after a heavy rain, for example, it'll accumulate water, and those are places where you can look at. Again, some other species, let's talk a little bit about permanent water mosquitoes, so your ponds, your lakes, things like that. But it has to be, you're not going to find these mosquitoes in the middle of a pond or a lake. Maybe if there's vegetation around, like water hyacinth or things like that are protecting it. But typically, they're going to be in that shallow edges of the ponds, very slow moving streams, wetlands, and marshes. And again, the weeds, such as hyacinth and water lettuce, things like that, really provide that harborage for some of these species. So they are out there. The permanent water, a couple of examples here that we have. Of course, this one is Aedes sollicitans. The reason why our program was developed in 1965 is parts of New Orleans East were being developed. This particular mosquito, they were out there in clouds. And so this is one of the reasons why they developed, the government city of New Orleans actually created our program. So when it comes to container breeders, very, very important. These are just some typical examples. Of course, tires and containers, saucers are a big issue, toys, people leave all kinds of stuff. But don't forget that the plants and sort of areas around trees that might have some knots and holes, those are places where water accumulates as well. And you can have mosquitoes in there as well. So common container breeders for us here in New Orleans, we've got Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, that's a yellow fever mosquito, and Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger. Believe it or not, our Culex quinx, our southern house mosquito, actually also uses containers pretty readily, even though they really like those sort of septic, highly organic waters. All right, so why are, we talk about how important it is to manage mosquitoes, of course, and mosquitoes can be vectors, which are, right, organisms that can transmit diseases, causing bacteria and viruses and parasites from one animal or plant to another. And so these are just some of the examples, right? You can have all kinds of different insects, and there's arachnids out there. Snails are a big one. Think about lungworm, rat lungworm, rodents, birds. There's lots of different animals out there that can transmit diseases. So an arthropod, and when we think about it, what is that? So it's an insect, it's an arachnid, it's a crustacean, right? So it's all of those different sort of groups of animals fall into arthropods. And so an arthropod-borne virus, right, because we talk about arboviruses all the time, so that's really sort of where it came from, that word. So it's arthropod-borne virus. And these can include ticks are a big issue. There are arboviral, issues with ticks and mosquitoes as well, and flies are in that mix as well. Now we're going to narrow it down even more to mosquito-borne diseases. So now we're really strictly talking about mosquitoes, and we're excluding, the ticks and everything else, and really focusing on mosquitoes. I think everybody has heard, right, that mosquitoes are probably the deadliest animal on the planet when you start thinking about malaria and the number of cases that it causes. But these are just a few examples from the Centers for Disease and Control Prevention: Zika virus and chikungunya, yellow fever, dengue, malaria. You've got heartworm in this mix as well. And then also the big one for the US is going to be West Nile fever. So West Nile virus, very important. So many of those, you can see the different mosquitoes that are at the bottom. Let's go here with my pointer so you can see the ones, the particular diseases and their association with the different mosquito species that are there. So I'm just going to really focus on West Nile very briefly. It is a mosquito Culex species here for us, southern house mosquito. Culex quinx, but Culex tarsalis. There's others depending on where you are in the US. And it is a bird mosquito disease. It just happens, right, during the time of the year that we're outside. And these are often active at night. We're outside, the mosquito happens to be infected with West Nile virus, and they bite us, and that virus gets transmitted to the person. Also very important, we're a dead-end host because we're not amplifying. So let's say another mosquito bites us, it doesn't pick up the virus and go infect somebody else. So we're a dead-end host. Same thing with horses. The good thing with horses is that there's a vaccine. All right. So each area of the country has different formats for mosquito abatement programs, right? So this happens to be Louisiana. We've got 64 parishes. We don't have counties. And we have about 23 parish-wide mosquito control programs. So actually, the state of Louisiana is a leader in mosquito control. There's really some fantastic programs in our region, and there's a lot of coordination in order to keep the public safe and provide the services that are needed. There are many parts of the country that have no service. Many parts of the country are reliant on our pest management professionals. So very important, and it does vary tremendously. So for us, right, I think any mosquito control program, we're about a medium-sized program, but we do a lot of different work in different fields. But our goal here really is to minimize the incidence of disease transmission, economic loss, and of course, medical emergencies that are caused by these pests. So super important for us, and we have to really look at these things in a holistic fashion. So then we're looking at source reduction, of course, the use of pesticides, sanitation, community education. You have to really look at the entire picture in order to be successful in your program. And so if you look at what the CDC has as far as an integrated mosquito management program, these are those sort of pillars. It's surveillance and source reduction, biological control, insecticides, of course, but also resistance testing. And of course, very important is public education. So I'm going to go very briefly with this. We're going to talk a little bit about surveillance. And for many of you, you may have a situation where you're trying to figure out what is going on. Why is that customer seeing lots of mosquitoes? And hopefully you can get them ID'd in your own facility. But if you can't, of course, there are lots of other resources for you to do that. But you may have to go in and do a survey. That survey may be, where do you have standing water, right? Or it may be that you deploy a trap, CDC light trap, to figure out what is it you're catching. So yeah, we do lots of surveys, but we also do surveillance, which is that repeated data collection over time. So there's two examples there, but I'm going to show you a slide here in a little while where we put out our traps every Monday. We pick them up every Tuesday. We ID them. And we also do West Nile testing, arboviral testing with the Louisiana State University. So we actually get our results on a Friday, and we know what kind of actions we need to take. But why are those surveillance programs important? Well, I can tell you, it's going to tell us what species of mosquitoes are there and if they're vectors, right? And then if we're testing, like I just said, we're looking for virus activity, it gives us a very good idea if there's virus floating in the mosquito populations, and of course then we have to take action. You can look at seasonal patterns of species. It really helps with resources and staff planning, a lot of different things that can be done in order to really sort of make good decisions about your program and how to run it. And so I am talking about mosquito control sort of at a municipal level, but many of the things that I'm talking about can actually be shrunk down on that property level or a neighborhood, for example. There's lots of PMPs that are doing mosquito spraying, so we need to have a little bit more information about what is actually going on in that particular environment or geography that you're treating. This is what I talked about with routine surveillance. Look, we have been increasing over the many years. And again, you may have to pivot. When Zika virus was knocking on our doorstep, we had to deploy lots more traps, right? Very important. You can also go in and look, just even with a turkey baster. Very simple, right? To go in, and if you've got some containers, cemeteries, often there are vases that hold water, or tires, for example. Maybe there's a tire pile. A turkey baster or a dipper. You can see the white little cup at the bottom. Those are very easy to go in and take a look. So very important to do that, record what you find and where. And so again, lots of different ways to actually collect adult mosquitoes. I wish there was a trap that would do collect everything, but it's not that way. And so these are just some of the examples, that are used in our field. And so you want to know, obviously, what species, are they vectors, and where are they? Very important. So these are the trap locations that I talked to you about, just a minute ago. We've got all these traps that are throughout New Orleans. And so over the course of time, it really gives us a very good profile of what we have. Now, 2023, we're in a drought here in Louisiana. So we've actually had record low numbers of our southern house mosquito. Our temperature was actually also above normal. So very low records or low counts. But in some of our wooded areas, and where we got other kinds of traps, we still see quite of an abundance of mosquitoes. So again, what happens, right? When you bring them in, you take a look at it, you ID it, we send them off for testing for arboviruses, but all that information really is that core activity for our surveillance program. And that's how you use the data. Now, the good thing here in Louisiana, and this is really how it should work, is that our mosquito control districts work with our lab at LSU. And then once the results come out, usually on a Friday morning, then everyone seems to get notified, which is super, right? And so we work with our health departments if needed, our state veterinarian. All that information is funneled up eventually to the CDC, where they're able to continue to make their maps of virus activity, so that everyone would have a greater sort of perspective, can go in on their websites and take a look. So very good communication. It's important, for all states to really strive towards that. So our breeding site surveillance is a huge part of our project, because you can have road work, for example, that's holding a lot of water. You can have tires, and then you get to know, right, through some of your surveys, where your areas, your swales are in a particular area. So your drainage ditches. And so all of those things become where we need to really focus and check them on a pretty regular basis so that it's not causing us mosquito issues. So when you're doing it, this is a great example of when you're out in a swale, perhaps in a park, and you've got your dipper with you and you're looking for where those floodwater mosquitoes could possibly be coming from. So it's important to really take your time, go in slowly, and you'll actually see, in this particular case, that you've got larvae and pupae that are there. And those pupae probably are not that far off from hatching. So as we gather the information about the swales and where we see mosquito breeding throughout Orleans Parish, and here's a map, and you can see the little tire dots, right? Different colors. The blue happens to be tire piles, red swales, and then we also have green infrastructure projects that we inspect that hold water on a temporary basis. So all those things we put on our maps, and those are locations that we inspect on a, like I said, pretty regular basis. Super important is source reduction, right? So everybody can do this. And we try to, really focus on education with our property owners to please spend a few minutes. We always say 10 minutes a week, maybe on the day that you put your trash can out, to walk around the property, look for those containers. You can see actually tires are a big thing, but pots and saucers, and even your gutters. This is actually a good case where you can see the the gutters are plugged and it's just tons of water and opportunities for mosquitoes to be breeding. So very important. And again, as you're inspecting your client's property, just to take a few minutes and either turn it over or make the point to let them know. Once a week, even in the summer, is enough. We don't have to be out there every single day. But again, I like to tie it to trash day, and just for those residents to do a quick turnaround and inspection of their yard. Again, there's different ways of gathering this information as well. I mean, we take 311. So this is a sort of a platform where residents can call in and make reports of tires, abandoned pools, all that good stuff that we need to inspect. So that's just that. But I'm sure, I'm sure you also have a method where your clients can call the office and then you go out for that inspection. And these, again, are some of the things that we are finding that are relatively common. Even abandoned swimming pools, when there was the sort of the bubble in the housing market many years ago, I think it's been 10 years, something like that. Lots of abandoned pools out there as houses went into bankruptcy. And then, of course, after disasters, all those kinds of things, it becomes a huge issue. But even toys. So sometimes people are, they're busy. And so we just need to make sure we show them where they need to turn over some of those containers, or if they're permanent, large containers that you can't move, you can see one here at the bottom, then you can put fish in there, mosquito fish, or even larvicide as needed. The biological control that we use primarily will be mosquito fish. There are some rules and regs on that, depending on what state you are in. They have to not be natural bodies of water that you would introduce Gambusia affinis. But if you have a pond, like a fountain or just a backyard concrete style pond, those are good places where sugar kettles, there's all different places that you can use. But they're voracious little creatures. They do a great job. Usually a dozen of them, 24 maybe for a swimming pool. They'll do the job over time. So pretty amazing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about larvicides and adulticides, because the use of insecticides is a huge component of any mosquito control program. So I'm going to just briefly touch on larvicides. There's different kinds out there. We actually use larvicides extensively on an area-wide basis. And but there's all different kinds of formulation, different kinds of modes of action that can be used, and each one will have its place. And so it's very important that you understand mosquito biology, your mosquito species, and then the type of larvicide that you're using. It might be a surface soil, but you may have a growth regulator. You may also have, like this one is the BTI. So you need the larvae they're filter feeders, right? To pick up those spores. And so very, very important that you select the right larvicide for the job. So with that. But the more common method really is, I think out there is really the use of adulticides. And honestly, larvicides and adulticides should be used together in any part of a program. It shouldn't just be adulticide only. And that's all I'm going to do for mosquito control, right? It's going to be a combination of all these different things we're talking about, from source reduction to use of larvicides. But of course, adulticides are very important. There's different kinds, space spraying, right? So if you think about it, what we do with the spray trucks and even backpacks, things like that. Barrier residual spraying, very common here, where you're actually spraying walls or underneath porches, vegetation, that kind of stuff. We don't do very much indoor residual spraying. That's more common overseas. You can see actually a picture from Africa here. I forget what country it is. I think it's Burkina Faso, where they're actually doing some treatments inside those homes because of anopheles. Anytime you use a pesticide, I cannot stress how important it is to be good stewards, right? We want good pesticide stewardship. That means you are understanding the label, you are understanding how it works, really understand all about that product as we are, utilizing it. Very, very important. Now, with the use of pesticides, there's a lot of advantages, right? So they often produce a really quick knockdown. That is what we want, right? Um, Sometimes that is what we need because it's now. Let's say you've got West Nile virus in an area. I've got to knock down those populations today, not tomorrow, today, because it's going to minimize the possibility of, a mosquito infecting a person. Often it's the most practical method, right? To sort of reach the desired control of what we're looking for. And again, we talked a little bit about epidemics, but it's absolutely a must if we're getting that low, quick knockdown. When it comes to chemical controls, they're all very temporary. You may be able, some of our saltwater mosquitoes, our floodwaters, they'll come in big numbers. We'll knock them down, but guess what? There's another hatch that's right behind it. So there really is no long term. It is, that reapplication is very necessary. When you're doing mosquito control on a large scale, like we are, these products are very expensive, right? And that's ground. When you start to get aerial programs, even more. So you really have to, pay attention to what you're doing. You can also develop resistance. Those are issues. I mean, there's different AIs out there. You need to pay attention to them. But also you need specialized equipment, skilled people, trained professionals. It's a whole lot more than the image of let's get in a truck and go. You really have to understand also your pesticides, right? What's in that tank? You really need to understand modes of action. There's lots of different ones, not lots, there's some out there. But today we're really going to focus mostly on the organophosphates and the pyrethroids that are in there, but you've got inorganics, organics, biological, mechanical pesticides. They're all out there. And one of the things too is that you have to understand how long they stay in the environment, right? So, and also we need to understand their breakdown into the environment. So one of the things that with our adulticides, we use Nailid, we use others as well, but Nailid is very susceptible to UV light. So by morning, and you get sunlight, that those products are already breaking down. You also have to understand sort of that mode of action, right, of that product that you're using. We already have talked about larvicides and just, different, if it's an IGR or if it's bacterial based. You have to understand all of that so that you're targeting the right stage of that larvae or pupae that's in the water. But as we get with newer products, they're often more selective, which is good, right? Because we want to hit that target and not have very much a broad spectrum. But we really want those targeted applications. So it's pretty good. And then again, for much of what we do, not much, but those space sprayings, if we're using ULV, ultra low volume, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, those aren't really have any residual, but many of us are using some of these residual sprays, right? And those are contact. I mean, even when the mosquito's flying around and a little tiny droplet lands on it, it's still a contact insecticide, but they're not inhaling it or ingesting it in this particular case. Lots of different modes of action here. Obviously, not modes of action, but different classifications of organic insecticides, excuse me. Botanicals, those are on the market for mosquito control. Organophosphates and pyrethroids are going to be your two big ones as it pertains to adults. Mosquitoes, but there's also growth regulators out there, for some of those larval. These are just some of the examples. I'm just putting this out there because they're out there. And quick knockdown, pretty short residual time. Some of these are minimal risk pesticides. They're out there. And I know some of the folks, different companies do use them. Organophosphates, the big ones are going to be malathion, chlorpyrifos, and Nailid. They're all cholinesterase inhibitors. They've been around for a very long time, right? That mode of action is going to really mess with the nerve cells and an inhibition of the cholinesterase enzyme. So it essentially leads to sort of that paralysis and death of that insect. I'm going to show you here just in a minute, but those nerves just keep firing. And so very important. So pyrethroid insecticides are very common for the use of mosquito control. So the pyrethroids are synthetic chemicals, right? that mimic the natural insecticide of pyrethrin. So those chrysanthemums that everyone sort of talks about, I know I get the question all the time. If I plant these chrysanthemums all around my yard, is that going to keep mosquitoes away? Well, at those concentrations, no, not really going to do it, but it's going to look really great, right? But again, it's still an insecticide. So these are pretty unique in that they're able to give some really good quick knockdown. And again, there's synthetics and then there's also the natural versions, but both of them are still considered insecticides. So pretty low toxicity in mammals and birds, that it really has that going for it. But however, you need to pay attention to if there's a koi pond or fish or something like that around your client, you have pretty high toxicity. It has pretty high toxicity to fish. So you need to really pay attention. So especially with drift, right? You don't want to kill anybody's koi fish. Typically, again, depends on the particular pyrethra that you have. Very low doses to kill those insects can be fast acting. Often their contact often. They don't dissolve very well in water, which is great. But it does bind pretty well to soil and organic matter. So make sure you pay attention to all of that. So the pyrethroids are going to also affect the nerve fibers, right? So it's really going to deal with that voltage gated sodium channel, very important. And so ultimately it's going to prevent it from closing normally. So that nerve is constantly going to be stimulated. And so, it's just not something that they can support. And eventually, you've got that overstimulation and those mosquitoes are going to die, those insects. I had mentioned about koi ponds. Take extreme care around water. Many of us are doing backyard mosquito treatments. Pay attention to even what's on the neighbor's yard. If it's too windy, that's not the day that you want to be spraying that vegetation. So it's very highly toxic to fish. I don't think many of you on the call, if you're a pest management professional, you're probably not using an airplane or even a helicopter for treatment of mosquitoes. But many folks already have their spray trucks, and you can even use gators, for example, in smaller vehicles to do mosquito abatement. So it comes in all different forms. Just make sure you're protected, that kind of stuff. You've got the equipment. I think what's most common are the hand units. This person right here in white in the Tyvek suit is actually applying a ULV application. And I will tell you, this person that I have my arrow on, it's just water in the tank. Okay. And that's a little bit of an older picture, but doing the backyard treatments and treating the vegetation. So the portable mist blowers are typically going to be a larger droplet size, whereas your ULV ultra low volume in this particular case are going to be pretty small droplets from 10 to 14 microns typically. And your portable mists are in the 200 range. So pretty important. And so anytime you use any kinds of pesticide, it really should be the control method of last resort. So it shouldn't be the first thing that you do, right? You really need to look at things holistically and see what options you have. Because again, you might have a pond that is continually breeding mosquitoes, the larvae and pupae and all of it. You really need to address it because you're ultimately not going to solve the issue. Okay, so we talk about, spraying. I had just talked about too much wind for drift, right? But you actually, when we do spray, especially with the plane and with our trucks, we actually want a little bit of wind. Not much, just a little bit to move it. If we're at 1 and 2, 3 miles an hour, that sort of all the droplets just hang in the air. And when you have a little bit of wind, it's going to cause those droplets to move and go into all the little nooks and crannies of wherever we're spraying. So pretty important with that. Our target really is flying mosquitoes. So those little tiny droplets need to impinge on those mosquitoes while they're flying. So hence you want to go when they're most active. For us, our main target is going to be our southern house mosquito. They're active at night, often late at night. So it sort of depends a little bit on the temperature and weather and all that business. But we are always spraying at night to target that particular mosquito. Very important. We want to definitely make it coincide with their activity. Okay, pretty important. When you're spraying in a particular area, there's lots of things to worry about. And as far as, I mean, you have to consider, right? You have to make sure your equipment's calibrated. You have to make sure that the mosquitoes are flying when you're spraying. If there's a big rain coming, we have to pay attention to all of those things so that you actually target the mosquito. Droplet size matters, okay? If our droplet size are so small and we didn't calibrate correctly, those droplets are never going to come down to the ground. They're going to continue, well, they will eventually, but they're going to move a very far distance and not in our target zone. All right. And so here's the backpack sprayers. It's about 200 typically. So those are, you're spraying that vegetation right in front of you. You want those larger droplets. It's going to, basically land on the foliage. So barrier treatments, that's pretty common in mosquito control. Obviously for pest management professionals, there's companies that this is what they do. Barrier, residual treatments. I mean, those are just two examples, but there's other AIs that are used out there using those backpack sprayers, handheld fog units. There's lots of different ones out there. We talked about this already a little bit, but with those are often residual sprays, so those mosquitoes are landing on those surfaces. Hopefully you're getting a good treatment underneath the leaves, right, where they could be hanging out, so which is important, where they're resting, and we want them to pick a lethal dose. Also, again, read the label, right, on all of this. Each product's got a little bit different nuance, so you need to make sure that you're wearing the right PPE, you're doing the right applications where you can. And so lots of work has been done with this in research. There's plenty of published papers on this, on the use of this particular technology. Misting systems are out there. There might be some companies that install misting systems. I'll just be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of these because you're really just putting out those pesticides on schedule often, or allowing that resident to strictly just, let me press the button, there's a spider, or whatever it is, a beneficial. So pretty indiscriminate, and we like to be, real targeted on our applications. So because of that, we need to really pay attention with our non-target effects, right? You have to follow the label. And it's very important that you pay attention to where you cannot spray. And so any kind of edible gardens, for example, herbs, like somebody might have oregano or peppermint or whatever it may be in the back. So those are places that you would not be able to spray as well. And we want everybody following the rules. We don't want to kill non-targets because it really distracts, right, from the whole mission of mosquito control. We want to be safe. We want to do things correctly. We want to have good product stewardship. And of course, environmentally mindful as well, because there aren't that many products. And so we want these products to last so that we have them available. So you can limit that your non-targets, right, with time and space. Most of your bees are going to be in that hive in the evening. So that's not something that you're going to be spraying during the day. And of course, if you have a bunch of flowers, that's not a place that you would want to spray either, because it's going to likely be in contact with those bees. So very important. So all the things that we've done, right? So that we've talked about a little bit already with, collecting data and meteorology and product stewardship, and how the biology of the mosquito is now and what products you should use. All that stuff goes into making decisions and, controlling the timing and really what method of control you're going to be using. So for us, very, very important, right, is we use data to make those decisions. And so, of course, you have historical data, but you also have the data of the week, right? So our positive mosquito collections, our positive pools that may have West Nile virus. We know where the mosquitoes are. Some are nuisance and some are mosquitoes of medical importance. And so those mosquitoes of medical importance are always going to win out over those nuisance mosquitoes. So as far as activity being done, we want the public to call in, let us know what is going on. And with all of this, right, so we're using pesticides out there, we have to keep resistance in mind. And so very important, right? So the insecticide resistance, right, it's the ability of strains of insects, in this case, we're talking about mosquitoes, right, to survive normal lethal doses of the insecticide. And so we want to make sure that the products we're using at the rate we're using is actually killing those mosquitoes. Very important. We don't want people having a false sense of security that we put out a particular product, oh, it's doing the job. No, we want to know that it is doing the job. So the time to act on resistance is before you even have it, okay? And so here's just some examples of here in New Orleans, we pretty much can do most methods of insecticide resistance testing with mosquitoes. And so very, very important in this, from bottle bioassays to looking at the genetics, looking for those genes that confer resistance in our populations of mosquitoes. So we've been able to, over the course of years, get this information, and we continue, to push it forward. So of course you can do have all the fancy tools, but you can also do cage trials, where you take your local mosquitoes and rear them out and put them in cages, and then put them out in the field and do a treatment and see what happens. So there's lots of different ways that you can figure out if you've got some resistance in your local population. When it comes to everything, right? So we talk about spray trucks, we talk about pesticides, we talked about resistance, all of that. It all boils down to education. I always say that pest management, vector control is a partnership between the folks that are doing the treatments and the people that are receiving the treatment. So we work really hard to try to get our public to turn over containers, pay attention to what we're doing. I won't lie, it is difficult because people are busy, maybe they just don't know, whatever the answer may be, but we need to continue, right, to push the information about education in this particular area. Now, when I think about education, it really should be, for it to be effective, a multi-agency approach. So if all of you that are on the call, you need information about, like, where can I go get information about mosquitoes? I would definitely go to the CDC's website. That is all vetted information. They're not going to care if you cut and paste. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you need to go get good, credible information. So you can see a picture here, 2016. This is at a press conference, and it was the beginning of the year. I'm in the back. You can see that. That's the mayor at the time. But this was all about Zika virus. So really have to commend the city of New Orleans for really getting out there early and educating the public. Turn over your containers. What is Zika virus? All these different things. And there were all these different agencies in the room at the same time. So there's a unified, easy to understand message, right? All of that's there. For the government folks that might be on the call, you may be doing a press release. Work on these press releases in advance, okay? So again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of good information out there, but do these things in advance, because any crisis that you have is very stressful. Things move fast, so it's important to do that. We talk about the importance of surveillance, right? So you're just not spraying on a schedule. I cannot tell you how many times I get emails or phone calls saying, hey, what's your schedule on spraying? We have no schedule. We look at the data, right, to make that decision. Medical questions for us, though we might know the answers, we're going to refer them to the doctors, to the epidemiologists, those folks. They're going to answer those things. And again, keep your message simple. It's the repellent use, it's the dress, it's, source reduction, which is drain. So think about it from your own company standpoint. What are the messages you want to get across to your customers? And those are the things that you can use or say over and over to get those messages across. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. I'm not really putting any social media or information on that. We have quite a bit. I'll give you our handle at the very end. And I would recommend that you go see it. If there's anything that you want, just email me. We'll work with you, right? The whole point is to get good information out so that you can educate your public, which are going to help you reduce callbacks, keep them safe. It's all good. You can also create flyers. Again, you don't necessarily want to pick something. I don't want to go pick something from Hawaii, even though they're great. Hawaii doesn't look like Louisiana, right? The houses are different. So we want to keep something local, so that it'll relate to your customers, people that are in that particular area. But there's a lot of good information out there. The other thing is lots of education and training. So these are pictures from some of the trainings that we've done. We offer 3 different academies: Mosquito Academy, Termite Academy. We've got Rodent and Wildlife coming up. And then we also have we just finished an ID workshop. So lots of different kinds of training that you can do hands-on, so that you can learn how to identify mosquitoes and, actually touch some of the equipment, learn some of these things. So very important, because the more professionals we're training, the better it is for everyone. They're out there using best practices and continue to move things forward. I think mosquito control often has a bad rap, right? So, use too many pesticides, people just go on a schedule. No, that's not how it really is, right? And so it's very important. So this is from 2018, but we actually have a bug fest coming up in 2023, which is super. And it's a great opportunity to just educate the residents on all the different professionals that are out there in the region. So that they see that, hey, it's a lot of professionals out there really trying to do the right thing. Of course, this is always fun, is getting in with the kids, right? And touching and, this little specimens and all that good stuff. But this is something that we also do. And like I said, there's so many opportunities to do it. It's a lot of fun. And, we continue to sort of educate everybody as we move forward. So I've got a couple more slides after this one, but I did want to bring it together. So I hope I got the point that mosquito control is actually very complex, right, in the grand scheme of things. And so it encompasses all kinds of different activities. And of course, we want to manage those mosquito populations, and we want to protect the human health, and of course, economics as well, right? So nobody wants to have a box that the CDC places over their city and say, don't go there, because it's a mosquito risk, right? So there are things that you need to do now, so that we create that preparedness level, so that we can control, we can easily pivot and manage these different risks as we have for moving forward. But you need to have a robust surveillance program. And I know it's a little bit more challenging if it's if you're a company, for example, a pest management professional, but work with your local districts, work with your universities, see who's around you to have some of this information. Now, if let's say you want to get into mosquito control, it's equipment and supplies and trained personnel. So you sort of really need to plan and improve and add to your infrastructure to be able to do it. But there's lots of places that you can go for training for that. And also it's an evolution, right? It's expensive to buy all the stuff. So you have to often work towards it over the many years. Cooperate when you can. And again, public education, there's lots of good stuff out there that you can utilize. Now, one of the things I'm really super excited to, actually let you know today is that we just recently received a big grant from the Centers for Disease and Control Prevention. And the whole goal of that is strengthening training, evaluation, partnerships, and the prevention and control of vector-borne diseases. And so mosquitoes are going to fall in this. So I'm actually going to be talking about mosquitoes and ticks and fleas and mice and lice. I mean, it's really the main focus of it. And so it's a big network. You can see the southern states there that are highlighted, but here's just a photograph of some of our partners. So you may be in some of these areas of the country. And so we hope to be able to connect with you at some point, because we're going to be doing a lot of cool stuff over the next 5 years with our collaborators. So just a couple examples here. We're going to be increasing the training opportunities for students and professionals to receive training in vector-borne prevention and control. And I'm talking classroom, modules, hands-on, webinars, you name it. We're going to have it. And so very, very important. Lots of opportunities for students, for internships and practicums, especially if they're in public health. So to work around our collaborators around the southern part of the U.S. We also going to be doing lots of evaluations and needs assessments. So we need to understand what all of you need. right? So, and also understanding the knowledge gaps, but also what resources are in those states. So, very important is there a mosquito control program in county by county? So, hopefully, as we start to connect everybody and understand what's already there, the pest management professionals are a huge component of this, that we want to capture this information so that we know if there is an outbreak of some sort, we might be able to leverage on some companies for whatever doing some of the work. We also want to leverage the public health tools that are already there. What manuals are there? We're going to be creating, a whole bunch of things, but we need to understand what is already there. Another part is to also partner. It's to build those partnerships, right, with our stakeholders. And that is really private industry, government folks, industry, all of those folks are all at the table. And so that we can sort of leverage and resources and also really help with education and make sure that people are aware and have the latest information on these vectors. So there's just a couple of examples, but really, we're looking forward to it. What are some of those benefits here? Obviously, we want to be able to communicate as best as possible and provide lots of opportunities for folks. There's going to be some travel awards in there as well to reach different kinds of training. Our goal here is to create these operational centers of excellence, one in each state, where you can travel maybe 5 hours max and go get the training that you need. But lots of great information. If you want to know more about it, you can send me an email at cdcvector@nola.gov. And you can find the City of New Orleans Mosquito and Termite Control Board and Facebook, Twitter. We're all over social media at NOLA Mosquito. And that's a great way to follow us so that you're aware of the different programs that we have here in town, but also webinars that reach every part of the world. So it's very important. If you'd like to join the mailing list for the Gulf South Vector Collaborative, that's what we're calling ourselves, there's a QR code, but you can also see the forms link at the bottom. So that way you can get on our email list. We'll start getting information to you about all these different training opportunities that might be out there. So with that, I'd like to say thank you again for taking the time to sit with me to talk a little bit about mosquito control. And my contact information is listed there. So if you have any questions, just please send me an email or give me a call. Thank you again.